For a few seconds, Jack Nicklaus says nothing at all. The room holds its breath. Then the greatest to ever play detonates the sport and exposes a secret they tried to bury. His words rip like a bombshell through the PGA Tour. One name escapes him, Rolap. What the new boss hid from the everyday players finally breaks loose. Nobody sitting there is ready for it. Here's the real trap. Days earlier, in a locked room at the Travelers, the tour rubber-stamped a 2028 model that splits golf in two. The stars helped design it. Journeyman got no such seat. Miss the top 90 and relegation swallows you, stripping your biggest paydays. Those grinders never cast a real vote. They learned their own demotion terms after the ink dried. So what did they smuggle past the locker room? Why gift ordinary pros a machine that erases a career in 1 year? The answer wounds deeper than the silence. Aching for the story the suits want buried? Punch subscribe and lock in here because we dig where the tour prays nobody looks. Here's what got sealed behind those doors and why Jack calls it a warning for every player without cover. Start with the document itself. On the 23rd of June at the Travelers Championship in Connecticut, the boards that govern professional golf signed off on a redesign that will not fully arrive until 2028. What they approved does something the sport has never dared before. It breaks the single, unified tour into two separate ladders and bolts a trap door between them. The upper ladder carries a new name, the PGA Tour Championship Series. Around 130 players will compete there across roughly 23 or 24 events that run from February into August. Every major championship lives inside it. The Players' Championship sits alongside them next to the richest team golf on the calendar. Purses at that level begin at $20 million and rise from there. For anyone who reaches the top rung, the rewards turn almost absurd. Below it waits the second ladder, the PGA Tour Challenger Series. Picture a proving ground where careers either climb toward the light or quietly run out of road. Here sits the mechanism nobody bothered to soften, one lifted almost whole from European soccer, promotion and relegation. At the close of each season, only the top 90 players inside the championship series hold their place with any genuine security. Slip beneath that line and the trapdoor gives way. Down a man tumbles into the challenger ranks, stripped of the guaranteed starts and the enormous checks that came with the tier above. A route back exists since a minimum of 20 golfers win promotion upward every year, though nothing about the fall is engineered to be kind. Now for the peace, the outrage tends to skip. This blueprint did not materialize from thin air, and no lone villain scribbled it in the dark. A committee shaped it, the Future Competitions Committee, and Tiger Woods occupied the chair at its head. Player directors sat in the room throughout. The tour later tallied 14 full committee meetings, 6 separate sessions with players, and 3 more with its advisory council. Its biggest names had a voice, and plenty of them helped write the very rules now being toasted as salvation. Consider the man who introduced it all. Woods stepped in front of the cameras at the Travelers to walk everyone through the changes. His first public appearance since a driving under the influence charge earlier in the spring had pulled him from view. His presence was deliberate. Nothing signals that a plan carries the sport's blessing quite like standing its most famous living player at the podium to sell it. So where does that leave the charge that something got buried? The answer hides in which players actually filled those chairs. Look at the figures who carried the meetings, the ones already sitting safely near the summit. Stars like Scotty Scheffler and Rory McIlroy, who will never once feel the breath of relegation. A structure they helped draft shields them almost by definition. Its real danger lands on a different crowd entirely, the men ranked outside the top 90, the grinders whose whole livelihood hangs on holding a card from 1 week to the next. Those players were represented on paper. Inside the living reality of it, they got handed a ladder with a hatch cut into the floor and told to feel grateful for the chance to climb. Understand what the drop truly costs. A place inside. That top 90 is not merely a ranking. It is a golden key to the richest tournaments, the security that lets a player plan a life and chase the game without the floor lurching every autumn. Lose it, and the guaranteed money evaporates. The biggest gates slam shut, and a man who spent a decade earning his spot is suddenly auditioning all over again. Stars debating the fine print will never live that nightmare. Bubble players will know little else. That is the exact fault line Jack Nicklaus stepped onto at his own tournament. He did not shout. 86 years old, hosting the memorial at the course he shaped out of Ohio farmland 5 decades back, he picked each phrase with the caution of a man who knows his words travel. He conceded that he was not exactly in favor of the road the tour had taken. Then he aimed straight at the thing gnawing at him most, a calendar squeezed so tight it can barely draw a breath. His objection was concrete rather than sentimental. Golf has spent the last few years piling its marquee events on top of one another, forcing the elevated tournaments into a cramped window and leaving long stretches of the year strangely hollow. Even the finest players alive have begun skipping some of those signature stops, unwilling or unable to sustain the grind. When the schedule demands too much at once, two groups pay the bill: the tournaments rich in history and the players who lack the freedom to pick and choose their weeks. He carries personal skin in that fight. The Cognizant Classic, staged at PGA National in Florida, is an event Nicklaus has long been bound to, and the congestion up top has left tournaments of its kind gasping for relevance. His own memorial lands just 2 weeks ahead of the U.S. Open, a slot he polished into a jewel across 50 patient years, and even that flagship now jostles for daylight inside a schedule bloated with $20 million showpieces. He built Muirfield Village to earn himself no profit at all, a fact that tells you his stake was never financial. What he guards is the shape of the season and the soul of a game that curdles when every single week is screaming to be noticed. Nicklaus put the human toll in language any golfer grasps instantly. During his prime, he could reel off 2 or 3 weeks of competition, after which his body and his focus demanded rest. Cram the majors and the money into one unbroken sprint, he warned, and the sport stops producing champions at their sharpest. What arrives instead are worn-out men dragging themselves through a gauntlet. For the stars, the cost amounts to merely duller golf. The journeymen scrambling for points to survive face something far crueler: competing while injured, unable to skip the weeks they cannot afford, their eyes forever drifting to the hatch below. Then came the admission that handed the whole affair its blade. Nicklaus revealed he had not yet spoken a single word with Brian Rolap about any of this. The one man who arguably outweighs every other figure in the game's history wanted a place at the table, and none had been offered before the plan set like concrete. He said, without dressing it up, that he hoped to sit down with Rolap and with Commissioner Jay Monahan and at last have the conversation. Sit with that image a moment. 18 professional major titles, a lifetime spent raising tournaments and molding the sport, and the master plan for golf's future sailed through approval while its greatest architect peered in from beyond the glass. Weigh what that snub means. No golfer breathing owns a resume to rival his. 6 green jackets tucked among those 18 majors, a design career that reshaped courses across the planet, and a moral authority the game has leaned on for generations. When a figure of that magnitude says the direction troubles him, it is not the grumble of a man out of touch. Instead, it reads as a warning from the one voice with nothing left to gain or lose. To grasp why Rolap charged ahead the way he did, you have to trace where he came from. 22 years of his career unfolded inside the National Football League, where he mastered the craft of turning a sport into unmissable television. The PGA Tour installed him as chief executive in the summer of 2025, and on the opening day of 2027, he inherits the commissioner's title from Monahan too. His brief is bruisingly simple: drag professional golf back to relevance in a shredded attention economy, and manage it while the each sport still bleeds from its long war with LIV golf. The conflict still colors every move he makes. Backed by Saudi Arabia's public investment fund, the Rebel League lured away a string of stars with guaranteed fortunes and split the men's game straight down the middle. A framework meant to reunite the two sides has crawled through negotiation for years, the money and the egos refusing to settle. Rolap needs a product muscular enough to bargain from strength, and a splintered, sleepy schedule hands him none of that. Reinvention through his eyes is not vanity. It functions as leverage. His reasoning holds a cold kind of sense. He wants fewer hollow weeks and many more that truly matter. the elite crashing into each other again and again. Field sizes would swell back to at least 120. A restored 36-hole cut means lifeless weekends quit masquerading as real competition. The entire top-tier campaign would close between late January and early September, wrapped up before American football devours the sporting calendar whole. Scarcity is the notion he circles back to over and over. Make each event feel indispensable, he insists, and the crowd comes flooding home. There is even a reworked climax under consideration, with match play stitched into the postseason to lend the year a burst of win-or-go-home tension. Laid out on paper, the vision is bold and internally consistent. Rolap brands it meritocracy. Cleaner pathways, steeper stakes, the deserving lifted, and everyone else granted a road upward. That single word, meritocracy, marks the precise spot where the two men crash. Rolap pictures a lean, merciless product engineered for screens and sponsors, a tour that penalizes drift and crowns excellence. Nicklaus looks at the identical sport and sees a texture that a century took to cultivate. He wants space between the heavyweight weeks, tournaments whose past still counts for something, and careers handed room to mature rather than a permanent fear of dropping. Neither vision is a fabrication. Each man genuinely loves the game. They simply clash, right down to the bone, over what safeguarding it actually requires. A small coda deserves telling. Not long after that press conference, Rolap and Monahan traveled to Muirfield Village, and the meeting Nicklaus had asked for finally took place. From the fragments that slipped out, it stayed cordial. 2 generations of the game seated across a table from each other. Still, the timing is the detail you cannot unnotice. That conversation landed after the vote, never before it. The legend won his audience only once the ink had thoroughly dried. Whether anything he said moved the needle stays unknown. The framework had already passed into law, the series carried its fresh name, and the trapdoor sat drawn into the design. A friendly hour at Muirfield rewrites none of that. It offered respect, not a redraft. Peel the noise away, and the real story stops being a duel between an aging king and an ambitious newcomer. It settles instead on the men no camera and no sponsor ever bothers to hold in frame. The Challenger Series will swell with names that were assured this amounted to progress. Plenty nodded along, since the alternative meant being branded difficult in a sport with a long memory. Most will only feel the true heft of a trap door at the instant it swings open under their feet. Nicklaus, planted firmly outside the machine, voiced aloud what a great many of them could not afford to whisper. A structure engineered to enrich the few and quietly thin out everyone else had never sincerely asked those people for their consent. So watch the names that disappear, not merely the ones that dazzle. When that trapdoor begins to swing in 2028, hold on to the name that tried to warn you and mark the ones who chose to stay silent. If this is the sort of breakdown you crave, honest angle intact, and the facts left standing, hit subscribe and switch on notifications because the next installment tracks the very players already drifting toward that drop zone, and you will not find it dissected like this anywhere else.